"Hi. Trust me," she said, in the same tone you'd use to calm a skittish dog. Palms up, eyes soft. The kind of softness that used to melt me when we were new and ordinary. I did trust her. That was the problem. Trust, it turns out, is a lot like handing someone your house key and hoping they don't notice the safe. We met in a church basement crowded with folding chairs and stale coffee. Not a sermon, community board meeting about the playground renovation. I went because my firm had bid on the resurfacing. She went because she said kids deserved better swings. She wore a yellow raincoat though the sun was out. It made her look like summer had taken human form. I told a joke about municipal budgets being allergic to joy, and she laughed the way people laugh when they're not worried about who's listening. We married 2 years later under a sugar maple that dripped gold like it had been saving color just for us. There were good years. The easy kind. Sundays that smelled like oranges and clean sheets. Afternoons when we'd read on opposite ends of the couch, feet touching like punctuation. She'd nestle into my shoulder and tell me who she wanted to be when she grew up, even though we were both 30 and already pretending to be grown. Somewhere in there, comfort became autopilot. I leaned hard into work. Project deadlines turned into a calendar made of pencil shavings and takeout receipts. She said she understood. I believed her. I liked the feeling of being useful, of carrying weight. The first hairline crack wasn't a text or a lipstick smudge. It was a laugh. Not shared, misfired. We were at her friend's birthday dinner, and I made a dry comment about how every restaurant in the city had decided menus needed to be novels. The table laughed. She didn't. She looked at me like I was speaking from a room she'd already left. It was a moment, a flicker, but I felt it in my stomach. Then the little things learned to link arms. Her phone started living face down. "My boss is intense about confidentiality," she said. Fair. Her perfume shifted from warm to sharp, a high note that belonged to a different season. She started calling me babe in a way that felt like a placeholder. I'd reach for her in bed, and she'd roll over like a wave pulling back from shore. None of it was proof. All of it was something. I'm not perfect in this story. There were nights I came home with my attention still humming at the office and set it on the kitchen counter like a hot pan. I forgot our anniversary 1 year. Remembered the next morning while shaving, the razor nicking my cheek right as the date clicked into place. I didn't always choose the long conversation when the short one would do. So when the distance grew, I told myself it was me. That a better, more present husband could close a gap with his bare hands. We had a fight about a plant. That's how these things go. A fiddle leaf fig she'd bought for the living room died a dramatic death, and I said something like, "It's just a plant," and she said, "It's never just anything with you." I opened my mouth to defend myself and felt old arguments crowding the doorway. We stood there, two people staring at a brown leaf, pretending it was the problem. Later, in bed, I apologized and traced shapes on her back until I fell asleep. She said, "I love you," into the pillow. It was an answer to a question I hadn't asked. One Saturday, I drove past the yoga studio she swore had started a new late-afternoon class. Lights off. A hand-lettered sign on the glass. Summer hours end at 3. I circled the block once, twice, like clarity might be hiding in a parking space. Maybe she'd stayed after to talk. Maybe she'd gone to juice with a friend. I could have called. I didn't. I went home and straightened the magazines like order could earn me answers. I found the receipt a week later, pressed into the pocket of her wool coat, a small square of truth. Valet ticket from a downtown hotel I'd only ever walked past on my way to venues I couldn't afford before I met her. Timestamp: 9:42 p.m. A Tuesday she'd come home smelling like eucalyptus and said the class had gone long. I stared at the numbers until they felt like a code. The valet company had a name I recognized. My firm had poured concrete for their garage last fall. I took a picture of the ticket and slid it back exactly where I'd found it, as if any disturbance might scatter the fragile geometry of our life. "Trust me," she said again, later, when I asked if everything was okay. Her hand on my cheek. Her gaze steady. She was so good at steady. That night I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and a glass of water that I refilled twice just to have something to do with my hands. I typed "private investigator" into the search bar and felt like a stranger in my own story. It seemed melodramatic, like something men in cheap suits do in shows with ominous music. But the alternative was calling 3 friends at midnight and asking them to tell me I wasn't crazy. I clicked a link with a plain website and a plain name. The bio said he used to be a cop. The testimonials were short, grateful, anonymous. I sent an email that began, "This might be nothing," because that's how hope speaks when it's still trying to keep the lights on. We met 2 days later in a coffee shop where the tables were too close together for wholesale betrayal, but somehow perfect for hiring someone to look under your life with a flashlight. He had kind eyes and a notebook that had seen weather. I told him who we were, the years, the inside jokes, the plant, the yoga class with the wrong hours. I told him about loving her in a way that sometimes made me forget my own outlines. He nodded and asked ordinary questions in a voice that didn't make me feel ridiculous. "I'm not trying to catch her," I said, feeling the phrase and hating it as it left my mouth. "I'm trying to know what's true." He wrote something down and said, "Truth is usually cheaper than doubt in the long run." It sounded like a sales line. It also sounded right. I authorized 2 weeks. Limited scope. Discreet. He slid a form across the table and a pen that worked on the first try. I signed like I was renting a car. Walking home, I counted porch lights and mailboxes, trying to convince myself I hadn't just invited a stranger into the most private room I had. For a few days, nothing happened. We lived in a polite, padded house where conversations wore helmets and our smiles had excellent posture. She told me a story about her coworker's dog, and I laughed in the right places. I cooked pasta and oversalted it, and we pretended it was fine. The distance felt like weather you dress for and endure. On a Wednesday, my phone buzzed while I was reviewing specs in a conference room that always smelled faintly like lemons. Unknown number. A single line of text, "You might want to sit down." I didn't sit down right away. My chair in the conference room might as well have been a mile away from the door, and my legs weren't ready to close that distance until I'd read the message twice more. "You might want to sit down." The PI, his name was Clay, wasn't the type to use words lightly. When we met, he told me that clients usually wanted a big dramatic reveal, but the truth rarely came dressed for television. It came in fragments. Receipts. A badly timed phone call. A hotel key card in the wrong wallet. Now, though, the weight of his warning pulled at me in a way I couldn't ignore. I excused myself from the meeting with something about a migraine. My voice didn't crack, which felt like a small miracle. In the safety of the empty stairwell, I called him back. He picked up on the first ring. "It's what you thought," he said, without preamble. And worse. Worse was a word I'd been preparing for without knowing exactly what it meant. I leaned against the wall, forehead pressed to cool concrete, and told him to send it all. The email came through 10 minutes later, as I sat in my car in the far corner of the parking garage. At first, the attachments were just numbers, dates, times, addresses. Then came the images. Grainy but clear enough. Her hair tied up in the way she used to when we'd spend lazy Saturdays making pancakes. The same black leather jacket I'd bought her for her birthday last year. Only now she was wearing it with someone else's hands on her waist. They weren't careless. No stolen kisses under streetlights. No lingering in lobbies. Everything happened indoors. But hotels have cameras in hallways. Parking garages do too. Clay had labeled each photo with time stamps like he was cataloging exhibits for a trial. 3 nights in 1 week. Different hotels. Always the same man. I stared at the screen until my eyes blurred. I thought I might throw up, but instead I just sat there. My first instinct wasn't to confront her, or to rage, but to calculate. The photographs weren't just proof, they were leverage. And I hated myself for thinking that way, for feeling the cold steel of strategy rising up through the fog of grief. That night, she came home late again. I was at the kitchen counter, pretending to read the same paragraph in a magazine over and over. She kissed my cheek, cool and perfunctory, and said the class had been intense tonight. I nodded. I didn't ask questions. If she noticed how quiet I was, she didn't say. She went upstairs to shower, and I heard the sound of the water hitting tile, steady, unbroken. I imagined her standing there, head tilted back, washing away traces of a life I wasn't invited into. The next morning, I called a lawyer. I didn't mention divorce. Not yet. I just wanted to know the lay of the land. What counted as marital property, what a judge could compel me to hand over, how fast someone could move money without raising suspicion. The lawyer's voice was calm, almost soothing, as she told me what I needed to hear, in the right hands, and with the right timing, you could shield a lot. That became my anchor, not the betrayal itself, but the logistics of surviving it. Over the next week, I followed Clay's updates with a detached kind of hunger. More photos. A couple of receipts. One video clip of her laughing, really laughing, in the passenger seat of his car at a gas station 2 towns over. She looked so alive in that moment, it was almost unbearable to watch. I never told Clay to stop. When he finally sent me the last file, he wrote only, "That's all you'll need." And looking at the folder, dates, faces, the kind of irrefutable detail no one could talk their way out of, I knew he was right. I didn't confront her that night either. Instead, I set about moving the chess pieces. Quietly, methodically, because if she'd built an entire hidden life while looking me in the eye each morning, then I could do the same. And when I was done, when the picture was complete, there'd be nothing left for her to take except the one thing she'd already thrown away. It happened on a Thursday, the kind of day that doesn't have the decency to feel different until it's over. I'd spent the morning signing papers, transfers, dissolutions, agreements that made my assets invisible to anyone not holding the right keys. By the time she came home, everything important was already somewhere she couldn't reach. She dropped her bag by the door and leaned in to kiss me. I let her. If my heart flinched, it didn't show. "How was class?" I asked. The same question I'd been asking for weeks, knowing the answer was a lie. She smiled. "Good. Hard." She opened the fridge, pulled out a bottle of sparkling water. "You should come sometime." I almost laughed at that. Almost. We ate dinner together, talking about nothing. She told me about a new restaurant she wanted to try, and I nodded like I was already making a reservation in my head. Later, we sat on the couch, her scrolling on her phone while I watched a muted documentary about bridges. I thought about how much weight a structure could carry before it failed, and how often the failure started in places no one could see. The next morning, I called her into the kitchen. I'd printed some of Clay's photos, just a few, laid them out on the table like placemats. She froze in the doorway. At first, her face was a study in confusion. Then recognition bloomed, slow but irreversible. Her hand went to her mouth. Where did you get these?" "I hired someone," I said. My voice was steady in a way that surprised me. I wanted to be sure. She shook her head. "It's not what you think." "It's exactly what I think," I said. Silence. She reached for one of the photos, as if she could smudge the truth out of it with her fingertips. "We can talk about this," she whispered. "We could have," I said, "before I moved everything." Her eyes snapped up. "Moved everything?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I saw the calculation start behind her eyes, the dawning realization that the marriage wasn't the only thing already gone. When she finally spoke, her voice was small. "You planned this." I nodded once. "The moment you told me to trust you." I gathered the photos into a neat stack, slid them into a manila envelope, and set it on the counter. "You can take these," I said, "or you can leave them. Makes no difference to me." She didn't move. I picked up my jacket, my keys, and walked out the door. The air outside felt sharper, cleaner. By the time the papers were filed, there was nothing left for her to fight for. No house, no business, no account she could reach. Just the truth, in black and white, and a signature that ended everything. The last time I saw her was in court. She looked at me like she was still trying to find the man she'd married. But that man had been gone for months, maybe years. When the judge stamped the decree, I felt no rush of triumph. Just a quiet, deep stillness. She'd told me to trust her. So I did. And then I trusted someone else. And that trust ended the marriage overnight. Bye-bye.